Hello, everyone. Thank you to be here. Today we have Laura Gómez to present her work. She's a PhD student here in the terrestrial ecology group with Anna Traveset. And well, I'll let you present your work.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for being here and for the presentation. Indeed, I will present to you the first chapter of my PhD thesis entitled When Strangers Bloom, How a Non-Native Species Reshape Pollination Networks on a Tropical Island. So that all of us are on the same page. Well, pollination, a very important ecological process by which the pollen is transferred to the stigma. When we talk about animal pollination, where is an animal the one that is mediating this transfer of the pollen? And basically, these are the reproductive parts of the flower. So when this happens, the flower is fertilized, and this allows the subsequent development of seeds and fruits. And so I just said, this mutualistic interaction between flowers and pollinators is super important. You wouldn't think so, but actually 68% of crops depend on it, 78% of plants in the temperate zone, and 94% of tropical plants. The current problem is that species are being translocated outside their native range faster than ever, and this is causing ecological homogenization. And also, once established, non-native species forge interaction with native ones and interfere in their interactions, and this can have two possible outcomes. There has been seen, for example, in Brazil, in an urban environment, there was a positive effect from non-native flowers as they were compensating for the lack of native resources at a certain point. So non-native flowers were supporting the populations of hummingbirds in an urban environment. However, most commonly observed in the wild, and here a report from the United States, non-native flowers usurp pollinators from native ones and outcompete them. A way to study how non-native species are integrating into these interactions is by networks. So here, in this case, a bipartite network between flowers and pollinators. In this case, so usually they look like these, plants in the down part, pollinators in the upper part. And here we have pollinators color-coded by functional groups. The width of the blocks represents the abundance, in this case, of the functional groups, and the width of the links represents the frequency of the interaction. And in the down part, the plants also color-coded in black non-native and in gray native. So here in this diagram, we already have a lot of information about how species are interacting in the community. And this allows us to evaluate how non-native species have integrated. We say that a species has integrated the community when it has as much or more interactions than native plants. We use for these species level metrics that allow us to measure how species are interacting in the community. This allows us to characterize the species network roles and also to know which are the more important species in the community, which basically are those that connect and stabilize the network. Are these species that interact with many different partners and have high frequency of visitation, high interaction frequency. So this means that they interact with many different species and also interact a lot. An interesting thing is that it has been seen that species level metrics are not static, but that the species change how they are interacting in response to environmental and seasonal changes. So, for example, we can evaluate under an invasional gradient from low invasion to high invasion, which are the more important species, and whether these are native or non-native. Under this framework, I went to Seychelles, an archipelago of islands in the eastern part of Africa, northern from Madagascar, to Frigate Island, which is a very small island. It's private, it has 2 square kilometers, and it's located in the eastern part from the inner islands in Seychelles. It has 6 different vegetation types and varying invasion level. We understand invasion level as the percentage of non-native flowers open. And we counted, we saw the invasion level of each vegetation type by setting transects of 100 meters long times 4 meters wide, and we counted flowers at the beginning of each month. And then we expressed flower abundance by square meter. With this information, we observed that the vegetation type that was least invaded was the coastal vegetation type at the periphery of the island. Basically, so there were cliffs, which I didn't have access to, but then it was the vegetation from the beaches, the ones that we included here. Then I would like to make small parentheses before saying the native forest. So Seychelles was colonized and discovered at the same time. And basically, when humans arrived, native flora and fauna were pretty much disturbed. Even nowadays, it's not clear if some plants are actually native or they are just naturalized. And so we cannot talk about pristine islands in the Seychelles. Most of them have been, they were plantations. Most of them were plantations. And so we say about islands that have been through an important restoration process. One of them has been Frigate Island. And so the native restored forests are areas where native plants have been replanted. And it looks pretty much like this. So there was some distance between the trees, and so the canopy was not super dense. And then we have the mixed forests, which were areas where vegetation was much denser and the canopy as well. We have the glacis, which are a characteristic ecosystem from the Seychelles up in the mountains. Bare rocks, small shrubs, they are highly exposed to temperature. Most of them host an important endemic and native species, but they are also highly invaded by the cocoa plume. I will talk about this shrub a little bit later. Then we have the gardens. So I just said Frigate is a private island. It has a resort. And so the gardens were next to the hotel villas. It was just like ornamental plants decorating. And then we have the coconut forest, so the past plantation, which it was located at the periphery of the island. And the thing is that cocos are quite invasive. They grow very fast and very dense, and it's very hard for other species to grow beneath them. So we took interaction data for 3 months, from October till December 2023. To do this, we did focal observations of 30 minutes, journal observations, so from 7:30 to 5:30 p.m. For this, we took a cluster of flowers and we observed them. We counted how many flowers we were observing during this time, and then we accumulated 3 hours per species. We took note of the pollinators only when they touched the reproductive parts of the flowers. With this information, we build the networks of each vegetation type. So you can see the smallest network was the one from the coconut forest because it was basically cocos and 2 other species. And then the biggest one was the one from the garden. Then we chose 4 species level metrics to evaluate how non-native species were integrating the community. The first one was normalized degree. This one measures with how many species with how many partners a species is interacting in proportion to all the available partners. Then we would expect that an important species has a high normalized degree as it has many interacting partners. Then we have contribution to nestedness. So here, a small parenthesis again to introduce you to the concept of nestedness. Basically, it has been seen that mutualistic interactions have this tendency of building nested structures. What does this mean? Well, in very general terms, that specialist species tend to interact with generalist species. So, for example, we have this coco de mer. If we were to say that this was a specialist species, it would mean that it only interacts with the day gecko. But in return, the day gecko interacts with many other plant species. In this case, it means that the coco de mer depends in the day gecko, but the day gecko does not depend solely in the coco de mer. And so this brings functional redundancy and stability to the networks. Then we would expect that an important species has a high contribution to nestedness. Then we have a specialization degree, which means how specialized the species is. Then we would expect that an important species would have a low specialization degree because it means that it not only is not specialized in one partner, but that it has many different partners. And lastly, we have a species strength, which measures to how many species that species is important. So then we would expect that an important one, it has a high species strength because it is important for many partners. With this in mind, we asked 3 different questions. The first one was, does the composition of species, pollinators and plants changes across vegetation types? And was the species level metrics also different across the vegetation types? The second question, does invasion level affect differently native and non-native species? And the last one was, does relative abundance of the species determine species network roles? Which basically means is how abundant a species is will determine how important it is in the network. For this, we use generalized linear mixed models in our studio. Our response variable was species level metrics, and our fixed effects were vegetation type, the interaction between species origin and invasion level, and species relative abundance, with the species being a random effect. So for our first question, we also used a Permanova test based on a Brake-Corte dissimilarity matrix to see how different species composition was. And here we have the NMDS to illustrate these differences. So basically we can see that the species composition of plants was indeed different across the vegetation types, with the exception of the mixed and the native forest, which share some similarities across months. This was expected because native forests were just like areas where the native plants had been replanted, but still they had some non-native plants there, similar to the ones that we could find in the mixed forest. And then for pollinators, interestingly, we found instead a temporal pattern. Here you can see October, November, and December. And so this temporal pattern most likely is underlying some phenological processes from the pollinators. And this was also expected because Frigate Island, as I said, it is a very small island where there is not huge physical barriers that stop pollinators from moving around. So they are shared across the vegetation types. Then regarding the differences of species level metrics across the vegetation types, we observed that in the mixed forest, the contribution to nestedness from plant and pollinator species was the lowest. And something that was striking was that some species that were present in different vegetation types had particularly lower values in the mixed forest. So for example, Lycea glutinosa, which is a non-native plant, in the mixed forest, we only recorded one interaction. It was a beautiful interaction with the fruit bats, and actually it was the only interaction that I recorded with fruit bats on Frigate Island, but then it was only one interaction. Instead, in the native forest, this plant had 9 different interactions. So probably this was because of the dense canopy. It has been seen that pollinators decreased their activity under shade, so probably pollinators were more prone to visit the same plant species in areas where they were more exposed to the sunlight. Then in the glasses, we observed that pollinators were the more specialized, and this probably was because of the presence of the cocoa plume. So I told you there is this invasive shrub in the Seychelles. It was introduced to control erosion, but it fastly became a problematic species across the entire archipelago. It grows very fast in very dense strands and occupies large areas. And the glasses on Frigate Island are invaded by it. They try to control it, but it grows very fast. And then the flowering peak of this shrub was between October and November, and it was also during this time where pollinators had the highest mean specialization degree. The thing is that despite this this shrub having a lot of flowers, it is basically only visited by the honeybee, so 93% of the visits were from the honeybee. And then what happened to the other pollinators was just basically they couldn't find the other resources. They couldn't find the flowers, and because of this, they became more specialized. By December, the flowering of this shrub decreased 94%, and also specialization degree of the pollinators dropped by half. Regarding our second question, does invasion level affect differently native and non-native species? Here I will start talking about what we observed with plants. Have in mind that native species are in green and non-native species are in yellow. So first of all, we observed that as invasion level increased, normalized degree of native plants significantly decreased, whereas native plants had an opposite trend, so it was positive, although it was not significant. For contribution to nestedness, we observed that it was also significantly decreasing for native plants, but it was also significantly increasing, but it was significantly increasing for non-native plants. And then for species strength, it was also significantly decreasing for native plants, and non-native plants had an opposite trend, although it was not significant. So what does this mean? Basically, that as the percentage of non-native flowers increases, native flowers have less pollination, less pollinating partners, so less pollinators are visiting them, they contribute less to nestedness, and they are less important to the pollinators in the community. Therefore, they are experiencing a negative effect by invasion level, and also that native plants are downgrading their network roles as invasion increases. This could have been facilitated by the similarities in trait between native and non-native species. This increases the probability of plants sharing pollinators. And the thing is that this is a common phenomenon from islands, where usually native plants have generalized traits, which means that they are open and accessible to many types of pollinators. At the same time, also on islands, because there is less less species, that in the mainland there is less competition, and interactions themselves tend to be more generalized. So many plant species interact with many pollinators, and this also facilitates the integration of non-native species, which at the same time successful invasive species tend to also have these traits, because this allows them to have a lot of interacting partners. Then islands in general are more vulnerable to invasions. The opposite, just for you to have it in mind, as an illustration, would be a tubular flower that has to be pollinated by this specific hummingbird with a very long beak. Then, for pollinators, what we observed was that the normalized degree was significantly decreasing for non-native pollinators, and native ones had the same trend, but it was not significant. And then specialization degree was significantly increasing for non-native ones, and native ones had the same trend, but it was not significant. So what this is telling us is that as the proportion of non-native flowers increases, pollinators are interacting less, and they are becoming more specialized. So it means that both native and non-native pollinators are experiencing a negative effect by invasion. So what happens sometimes, usually with non-native flowers, is that if there is only one species occupying a large area, as we saw in the classes, so indeed resources decrease. So instead of being a lot of different species, a lot of different floral resources for pollinators, there is only one. So yeah, they are interacting less, they have less partners, they have a higher specialization, and also there's a lower functional redundancy. Similar results were observed on Mahe, which is the biggest island from the Seychelles in the Inselbergs, which are pretty much similar to the classes. They also observed that as invasion increased, there was a decrease in interaction frequency and interaction diversity, particularly for the endemic bee Lasioclosum maense and the introduced honeybee. And our last question, whether species relative abundance would determine the importance of a species in the network. Well, we saw that only for pollinators this was true. So the more abundant a species of pollinators was, the more interacting partners that it would have, the more it would contribute to nestedness, and the more important it was for the plant species in the network. But this was not true for plants, only for pollinators. So what happens is that the more abundant a species is, the higher encounter probability that it has, and then the more interactions that it would have. And again, this is also a common phenomenon from islands, where interactions are driven by neutral processes, which means random chance of encounter. So the more abundant the species is, as I just said, well, there's a higher chance of encounter with other species, and then there will be more interactions. The opposite would be, as I just showed you, well, that it has to be a specific trait match between the flowers and the pollinators for them to be pollinated. Now, we just want you to go home knowing that invasion level has a negative effect on native plants, but also on native and non-native pollinators, and that the restoration of native plants is important in Seychelles to safeguard the pollination. Thank you.
Follow questions. So the first one. So first of all, thanks for the talk. It was really nicely delivered, and I was wondering whether you think that in the original map that you showed, there are areas of the island, right, where there is the plantations, I guess, and areas where there are other type of vegetation. I was wondering whether there is anything special, quote unquote, in the boundary regions between, or you can learn something in the boundary region between one area and the other, where you sort of are going from one type of ecosystem where maybe is less invaded to another one which is more invaded. Can you sort of use it to go back and forth between more and less invasion?
I guess during the moment that you are doing the observations, then you would have to specify that you are in the border, and then see the differences between the border and inside.
But there is a difference at the border.
I don't think in I mean, maybe there is, but like if there is more interactions, The thing that here we saw that shade was could have been decreasing the number of interactions in the mixed forest. But then if you're in the border, there is no shade. Then the composition of species of pollinators, they were shared across the entire island. So it didn't change that some species were more, so the border itself wouldn't change that. And then what we saw was more invasion level, but then invasion didn't affect by vegetation type. So we didn't see, for example, that in the glasses that were more invaded than sorry.
Well, I would say, for example, the gardens should be completely new species, right? Or almost completely, but actually you can see.
Yes, exactly.
So,
But then we didn't see that for all the species level metrics that we measured, they were lower on the gardens. So because we were also expecting that they were all just lower, that we would see the opposite in the species level. So lower in the cocoa and then higher in the coastal, but we didn't see that. But we saw that invasion level had an effect more like also temporal. So if invasion itself, but not by vegetation types.
yeah, okay. And the other, I don't know, can I ask another question? So the other question I had was about the last bit about the abundance, the role of abundance. How do you estimate the abundance of a population?
Yeah, so for pollinators, we count abundance as the number of visits.
Oh, but they're not necessarily directly related to the number of individuals, right?
But it is proportional. Like if if a pollinator is more abundant, well, then you will have a higher probability of seeing it. And if you're observing for 3 months, well, I guess it goes like that. Like you would at some point see all the pollinators, and the ones that are less common, you would observe them less. It is true that it would help to have external counting. So sometimes they also do transects, and they count the pollinators in these transects by collecting them. But we didn't do that. We just took the.
But they will also have different, I guess, preferences for different days, different hours during the day, right?
Yes, that's why we did observations across the I changed vegetation. I not only observed the glasses only in the morning, I also observed them during the afternoon. And I also saw that when it was cloudy, it changed. When it was sunny, it changed. But like that was not inside the question. But you could also see if there is changes. But yeah, I mean, when there's a lot of sun, there was a lot of honeybees around the flowers. And when there was more cloudy, the honeybees were not there, and then the sunbirds were in the flowers.
Do you think that there is interaction between the pollinators? I mean, something is there, then another species cannot be there, or it's disincentivized from.
So honeybees actually are very aggressive, and they tend to like occupy. So they are very dense, and they are a lot in the flowers. So for example, I say the only interaction I observed with the fruit bats on Frigate was on this plant, but on another island in Seychelles, it was very common to see fruit bats in the palm trees. But then the palm trees in Frigate were full of honeybees. So I would say that the honeybees were, yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's scary, but at least the fruit bat didn't want to go to the.
Yeah, question related to what Marco asked. Do you know, I guess that like animals have different feeding frequencies. So maybe you have an animal that feeds 20 times a day, and maybe you have an animal that feeds once a day. Is this something that would be a problem for the analysis, or something that is considered in the observations? Because I don't know if maybe for the flower you don't care if it's always the same, like once a day or 20 times a day, because you just care of how much pollen it brings.
Well, in this case, I was just checking for diurnal pollination, and usually, well, these animals are active during the day, and then you will see that it's not like the bee would have breakfast and then they'll eat the entire day, that they are active during the day and they go to the flowers. Maybe if it's raining, then they would just shelter, but then they are active during the day, and then at night you would see that another composition of pollinators. But I don't think like it's as mammals or bigger animals, they would like feed and then don't feed during the entire day, but they are like constantly looking for the resources.
No, I was wondering because maybe a rat eats less times than a bee, but maybe every time it goes to the pollen, maybe it brings like more amount of pollen, and kind of
Ah.
like you should kind of rescale the network to this. I mean, I don't know if it's something that is measurable. I understand that it's
Sí, yeah,
it's a-
so
difficulty.
so here we are just assuming visitations as pollination. But then if you want to check what yours, like how efficient a pollinator is, then you can take the flowers and check before they open. So once you know they open, then you bag them. Well, first you see, okay, this bee went to it. You have, yeah, okay, honeybee, then you bag it. And then you can check with many flowers, okay, honeybees are more efficient pollinators for this flower, or no, bugs are more efficient. So here you're checking pollination efficiency by pollinators, and then you can see, okay, yeah, maybe the morphology. Usually honeybees are not super efficient pollinators, for example. They visit a lot of flowers and they don't actually pollinate them. So yeah, that changes with the morphology, but well, no, I won't go deeper into it. I don't.
That's okay.
Super nice stuff. Thank you. I wonder whether you have control for the richness of plants in the places where you have sample. Because what I have seen normally is that when there is a higher richness of plants, then you have more specialist interactions, because the insects segregate the niches. So I wonder to what extent some of the results could be related to the richness of the communities. Have you considered that?
I didn't consider it, but for example, the garden was the one with the highest species diversity of plants, and the metrics did not benefit. Like then it was more pollinators were more specialized instead in the glasses. So I thought it was more because of the presence of this particular cocoa plum that was highly invasive, but not. And also, I wouldn't think that the differences are such significant that they would make those distinctions between, like, there is more competition, so pollinators will segregate more into specialist interactions. But I mean, the species richness doesn't really change a lot, and there's like a generalized interaction between all plants and pollinators
The
across that.
species richness doesn't differ so much.
No, I don't think. I mean, just in the coconut plantation where we only were able to observe 3 plant species, but otherwise, I would say more or less.
In the last graph that you showed,
This one or the
no, some that it seems that they were like a saturating group.
this one?
Yeah, here. Have you tried to fit another kind of shape of the group? Because, it seems like it goes this way and it saturates. Maybe it will fit better a non-linear relationship. And another thing, you sort of, I think you said that the increasing specialization is not very good.
No.
It's not good for, it's like it's but what do you think about increasing specialization? Because you have shown some graphs in which
No. I mean,
specialization was increasing.
I meant like an important species. Maybe we can see that an important species, we would expect it not to be super specialized, because like in terms of the community, we would like if a species is important for the community, then we would expect it to have many different partners. So it wouldn't be specialized. It could be important for a specific plant species because it is its pollinator. So I wouldn't say that specialization is wrong. Basically, the Andes and like where there is a lot of biodiversity, species tends to be more specialized because there's more competition. So they segregate into this. It's just like for a community-wide perspective, a species would be more important if it is less specialized, but under the community. But for a plant, probably that pollinator is the most important creature.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just that we normally say that it's good that they are functional redundancy, because then it's more stable, the communities are more stable and everything. But actually, when the communities are quite conserved and you have a very high diversity and everything, normally you have a specialized relationship that are lost when you have a very degraded community. So I think actually that having specialist interactions is good.
Yeah, I
But
guess it would also depend on the system. Like
Exactly.
on islands, when there's very few pollinators and very few flowers, you wouldn't expect that necessarily to evolve. Is that there's more.
But I guess you don't see that along the degradation gradient you lost the specialist interactions. Don't you see that?
But we didn't see this. We just saw that with the invasion. I related the high specialization from the glasses to the invasion of the cocoplum, but I didn't check into whether they were losing specialist interactions with the invasion. Like it didn't go deep.
And have you thought about taking some measurements of the fruit set of some plants to see whether this affects the
When I was there was the plan, but it was too hard. It was too hard to take control. I mean, it's a small island, but it had some mountains. And going around vegetation types, doing observations and checking for bats by myself, it was not super easy. So I did try, but no, the data was not successful.
So many flowers fell because of the rain, I think.
Also, at some point it was raining very much, and the ones that I labeled fell. Fields.
Mila, thank you very much for your nice talk. As an oceanographer, this is all new to me. I just have a very easy question to you. So when you talk about invasive species, like plants, how they move from other place to the island?
Usually they are brought by humans. So for example, most of the non-native plants were brought for the plantation. So we see a lot of fruiting trees, papayas.
Island.
Yeah, but at some point it was like before it was not private, or I mean it was always a plantation, so probably somebody just said this is my island. They made it their plantation with coconuts and a lot of fruiting trees, a lot from Latin America. And then when I think the Seychelles, they became independent, and then they distributed the islands, and some people said, okay, now again, this is my island, I will buy it. And the guy who owns Frigate, he built a resort, and he also did some restoration. But the non-native plants were already there. They arrived with humans. You should ask the ones taking species around.
You can also be the one that brings some species to the island, right?
I mean, it could happen, but unless it is not on purpose.
Other researchers can also identify some new invasive species in the study. Right?
So it happens sometimes, when you're walking around, even, I don't know, in Mallorca, but you get seeds stick on your pants. But usually you have to clean those when you go from island to island. Then you're careful not to going around, and unless you don't take the seed with you, like illegal transportation of then you shouldn't be the one being the vector of this transportation between species. But it is humans the ones moving around the species.
Thanks.
Just for you to know, if you want to go to this island, all can go, but maybe you will have to pay like 20,000 euros per night. Only, guys like Ronaldo and hackers from Arabia go. Fortunately for us, the wife of the manager is a biologist, Italy, from Italy. And they let it for free. So we didn't have to pay all of
for
us.
us it was the wooden old one for Anna.
Yeah, we didn't stay in the hotel.
The first year we were.
My house was wooden, no AC, no internet.
The first year we were in one of these villas after coming from the film. We were in the jacuzzi looking at the sea, but we never showed this picture.
And for me, it was a completely different experience.
Now, things changed the second year.
Yeah, because also it was under construction, so it was very sad. Okay, well, thank you very much.